William Lee is Chief Economist and Executive Director at the Milken Institute. He's joining us now. William, great to have you with us here. I don't know if you agree with that. I think so, and I think maybe, two conflicts, right? One done and one more to go. That's Russia-Ukraine. And that's the big thing for many, that at least with Trump, he'll sort of get some of these conflicts under control. Do you think that's the way to look at this?
That's a great perspective. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that there's a lot of things that are happening right now that are in anticipation of President Trump taking office. We see that the global leaders have been reacting much differently than they have throughout the Biden administration. When President Trump comes around and really operates according to his manual, which is the art of the deal, everyone knows they better start getting their act together and prepare for his negotiating ploys. And what we learned in that book, The Art of the Deal, was that his negotiating ploys that start out with strong, outrageous statements and then eventually come through a more reasonable resolution. But those outrageous statements, like, if you don't behave now, you're going to really learn to behave once you get into office. Those kind of threats, people know that President Trump is crazy enough to actually carry them out. So they are really acting in a way that they didn't for the last 3.5 years.
And by the way, William, he said that I'm going to, of course, maybe a little bit of bluster, but I'm going to solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict even before I take office. So it's very clearly laid out as a big priority, right, to end that conflict as well. Do you think we're going to see activity, action? I mean, I was reading that, in President Putin in Russia, there's some kind of summit which is being arranged. He's agreed to it. You think that'll be the next one on the list?
It might be, but I think Russia right now and the whole Ukraine fiasco is tied up in some global politics that involve the financing of that war through China and many other of the new axis of nations that have lined together against the United States. So I think to unravel that situation might be just as difficult as the Middle East. I think what we found is that in the Middle East, the negotiations have been in place for quite some time now. We had the Abraham Accords that were an initial blueprint of what President Trump wanted to do. And I think people realized that the Middle East is such a high priority for President Trump that people started to get their act together sooner. In the Ukraine-Russia war, I think the plan is less clear. And because the actors are so much more intricately tied together in ways that are really not quite visible right now, I think that's going to take a while to unravel. But surely the funding that the Ukraine has been receiving, the carte blanche kind of funding that they have been accustomed to, is certainly something that President Trump said he's going to change.
Okay. William, hi, great to have you on the show. Now, on the markets, I think what everyone's trying to understand is whether this Trump incoming tantrum that we've seen with the U.S. yields as well as the dollar index, this massive fear about tariffs, etc., and absolutely unchecked spending, which is what's driving up yields, of course. But a lot of that fear psychosis, whether that's over and done, or whether you wouldn't really take it off the table entirely. I mean, what I'm asking is that what do you see ahead in terms of both yields and the dollar, given the expectations from policy?
I've talked to a lot of global investors, certain in the days after the election. And the main question that's on every international investor's mind is, are we going to have a repeat of the 1930s? Will the tariff situation be put in place that'll replicate the 1930s Smoot-Hawley tariffs, where it really crunched world trade to the point where the global economy went into depression? And I have to say, absolutely not. The situation now is completely different. The man who is wielding that tariff policy tool has very different intentions. I tell everyone, remember why President Trump was elected. It's the Make America Great agenda, right? Maximize the income of Americans, maximize the number of jobs for Americans, and to try to secure our supply chains in a way that doesn't expose us to a lot of global politics and weaknesses and vulnerabilities that we saw after COVID. Those are the principles behind the tariff. And so, as I said before, the art of the deal tells you that his initial round is that he's going to be and he's going to make it very credible to say that I love tariffs. I think tariffs are things that allow the United States to do two things. One is industrial policy to try to subsidize the industries that we think are important, and also tax the importers who want to have access into the U.S. market. Now, it could well be that some of that tax will fall on American consumers, but that depends on the product. If the foreign exporter wants to have a market share, they will absorb a good chunk of the cost of that tariff. So using a tariff is really a way for President Trump to accomplish what President Biden's done through direct subsidies like the CHIPS Act, and to try to coalesce a new form of trading. We're going to see, I believe, globalization shift from where you have concentrations of production, like in China, into regional trade patterns, where we'll have distributed production in very many different places, India being one of them.
All right, William, final question before we let you go. You're clearly indicating that you believe Trump will walk the talk. So you will have to wait by for that. Give and take everything. You know, if he's going to be focusing a lot on the U.S. economy, what happens to an economy like India? From a market perspective, how do you approach India? We have earnings, stable government out here. But, you know, there has been some kind of nervousness with regard to Indian markets. Trump will be good for India?
I think Trump will be good for the whole world, including India. What we're going to find is that the arrangements for the treaties will be no longer this large multilateral treaty that everyone has to fit into, but a lot of bilateral deals. Bilateral deals done by nations and also bilateral by sector, possibly even bilateral by company. Indian companies and Indian sectors will have a chance to negotiate the terms of trade and free trade agreements with the United States. I think that flexibility and speed of action, because bilateral deals are much easier than multilateral deals, we'll find that that is the form of new trade foreign policy that will benefit the rest of the world, and especially India, as India starts to gear up its tech sector and gear up to become a massive world producer.
All right, William, it's a great conversation, and I hope the first of many with you on CNBC TV 18. Thank you very much for joining us and appreciate your time here on CNBC.